I am Rochelle, 34 years old, and until last week, I was the backbone of Tech Dynamics, the software company I helped build from 12 employees to over 200. 8 years of my life poured into their systems only to be called legacy baggage by the boss's nephew, with an MBA and zero coding experience. They fired me on Friday. Their $10 million product launch was Monday. When the screens went black and my name appeared in their code, I felt nothing but a strange, sad vindication. The color drained from his face as investors started heading for the exits. Before I dive into this wild story, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you have ever been underestimated at work, and subscribe to hear more stories about corporate karma and professional redemption. My journey in tech began at State University with a computer science degree. Unlike many of my classmates who gravitated toward flashy front-end development or trendy mobile apps, I fell in love with back-end infrastructure. The invisible architecture that makes everything else possible, the systems nobody notices until they fail. Tech Dynamics was not called that when I joined. It was App Secure Solutions, a 12-person startup operating out of what was essentially a converted storage space above a deli in downtown Seattle. The heating was inconsistent, the internet dropped every time it rained, and we all shared one bathroom. But we had a vision: enterprise security solutions that actually worked. Our founder, Richard Maxwell, was a former security consultant who had seen too many breaches happen because of overcomplicated systems that nobody understood how to maintain. Simplicity is security, he would say, and I believed in that mission. I was employee number 9. My desk was a door laid across 2 filing cabinets, but I was building something that mattered. For those first 3 years, I architected the core authentication and security systems that would eventually become the backbone of everything Tech Dynamics sold. My fingerprints were on every line of code in our most critical systems. I knew those systems inside and out because I had built them, tested them, broken them, and rebuilt them stronger. We landed our first major client in year 2. By year 4, we had 50 employees in actual office space, with separate rooms for different departments. Year 6 brought the rebrand to Tech Dynamics, a name chosen by marketing consultants to sound more dynamic and forward-thinking. Richard disliked it but was overruled by our new board of investors. By the time I had been there 8 years, Tech Dynamics occupied 3 floors of a glass and steel building. We had over 200 employees, a full HR department, and catered lunches. Success had changed us as it always does. That was when Marcus arrived. Marcus Maxwell, 27 years old, fresh MBA from Wharton and Richard's nephew. His first day, he wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He was introduced as our new director of product strategy, a position that seemed to have been created specifically for him. Marcus brings fresh perspectives and cutting-edge business intelligence to help us scale to the next level. Richard announced at the company all-hands meeting. Marcus smiled with perfect teeth and spoke about synergies and market disruption for 15 minutes without saying anything of substance. Within a month, the company culture began to shift. Engineering decisions were suddenly being driven by marketing concerns. Our carefully planned development roadmap was scrapped in favor of chasing the latest tech trends. Marcus began hiring rapidly, bringing in young developers who used frameworks so new they were still in beta. "We need to move faster," became his mantra. "We need to disrupt ourselves before someone else disrupts us." I raised concerns in meetings. "These new systems have not been security tested. We need time to properly integrate them with our core infrastructure." Marcus would smile in that condescending way of his. "That is exactly the kind of thinking that keeps companies stuck in the past, Rochelle. We need to embrace agility and cutting-edge solutions." Suddenly, I was the voice of caution, the one saying no, the obstacle to progress. In an industry obsessed with youth and novelty, my 8 years of experience with the company became a liability rather than an asset. I watched as my team was gradually populated with new hires, most barely a year out of coding boot camps. They were enthusiastic and worked long hours, but they did not understand the foundation they were building upon. My responsibilities were slowly stripped away. New projects went to new teams while I was left maintaining the legacy systems. That was the first time I heard the term applied to my work. Legacy. As if the core security architecture I had built was some ancient relic rather than the foundation everything else depended on. Meanwhile, Marcus championed a new flagship product, a comprehensive software-as-a-service platform that would supposedly revolutionize how enterprises managed their digital security. Talent Fusion was its name, though what talent or fusion had to do with security nobody could explain to me. The project was developed by Marcus's new team, with minimal consultation from those of us who had built the original systems. Investors were pouring money in. I heard numbers around $10 million raised specifically for this launch. There were demos for the board that looked slick and impressive, full of animated graphics and real-time dashboards. What these demos did not show was how these systems would integrate with our actual security infrastructure. I knew they were using temporary workarounds for the demonstration's shortcuts that would never work in production. But nobody was listening to me anymore. I had become, in the eyes of leadership, a remnant of the company's past rather than part of its future. I still came to work every day, still maintained the systems that kept our existing clients secure, but I could feel myself being pushed to the margins. In meetings, my concerns were dismissed as resistant to change. In the office, newer employees did not know who I was or what I did. I watched as Marcus paraded potential investors through the office, pointing out his team of young developers as evidence of our forward-thinking culture, while carefully avoiding the corner where myself and the other original engineers sat. We began referring to ourselves as the Legacy Corner, as a bitter joke. The date for the Talent Fusion launch was set, a major event with press industry analysts and investors. $10 million riding on a product that I knew was built on a shaky foundation integrated with core systems by developers who did not fully understand them. I had a feeling of impending doom, but all I could do was document my concerns and continue to do my job. I did not know then that I would not even be employed by Tech Dynamics when the launch date arrived. I did not know that Marcus had already decided that removing legacy baggage was the next step in his vision for the company's future. The problems began small, as they always do in software development. Minor inconsistencies in how the new Talent Fusion platform interacted with our core authentication systems. Error logs showing failed handshakes between services. Nothing catastrophic, but warning signs that experienced engineers recognize as symptoms of deeper architectural issues. I documented everything meticulously, writing detailed technical analyses and sending them up the chain of command. My emails to Marcus went unanswered for days, then received cursory responses like, "Looking into it," or "Team is aware." I began copying Richard and our CTO Kenneth, but they seemed to have given Marcus full autonomy over the project. Then came the scheduling conflicts. Every time I tried to set up meetings with the Talent Fusion development team, Marcus would reschedule for times he knew I had standing commitments with our legacy clients. When I did manage to attend, my input was minimized or dismissed. "We are handling the integration points," Marcus would say. "Your team just needs to make sure the old systems stay running." The old systems. As if they were obsolete rather than the foundation everything else depended on. 4 months before the scheduled launch, I discovered something alarming while reviewing system logs. The Talent Fusion developers were using my personal administrator credentials in their test environments. Not temporary development credentials or properly scoped service accounts, but my actual production access keys. This was a fundamental security violation. If their test environments were compromised, an attacker would have my level of access to our production systems. Even worse, if those credentials were accidentally pushed to the production version of Talent Fusion, the entire platform would depend on my personal access remaining active. I immediately documented the issue and requested an emergency meeting with Marcus and the development leads. For once, Marcus did not reschedule, probably because I had classified it as a critical security vulnerability which would have triggered automatic notifications to our security compliance team. The meeting did not go well. "You are overreacting," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair in the glass-walled conference room. "This is standard practice during rapid development." "It absolutely is not," I countered, trying to keep my voice level. "It violates every security protocol we have. You need to create proper service accounts with appropriate permission scoping." Dave, one of the lead developers Marcus had hired, rolled his eyes. "That would take weeks to implement properly. We do not have time for that kind of refactoring." "Then you need to push back the launch date," I said. "This is exactly the kind of shortcut that leads to massive security breaches." Marcus fixed me with a cold stare. "The launch date is not moving. We have investors and press committed. Your concerns are noted, but frankly, I think you are stuck in outdated thinking. Modern development moves faster. Security vulnerabilities move even faster, I replied, but I could see I was not getting through. After the meeting, I wrote up a formal security advisory and sent it to everyone in leadership, including our security compliance officers. I also began working on a comprehensive credential management plan that would allow the Talent Fusion team to create proper service accounts without disrupting their development timeline. The next week, 2 more of the original engineering team were let go. Both had raised concerns similar to mine about the new platform's architecture. The official reason was reorganization for growth, but the message was clear: dissent was not welcome. My friend Sandra from the UI design team stopped by my desk after hours that Friday. Sandra had been with the company almost as long as I had, and we had developed the kind of friendship that forms between people who have watched a small startup grow into something unrecognizable. They are testing the demo without any real data connections, she whispered, glancing around to make sure we were alone. Marcus told us to make sure everything looks good on screen, but half the functions just loop back sample responses. That will never work in production, I said. That is what I told them, but... She shrugged. Oh. And they moved up the launch date. It is in 3 weeks now, instead of 4. What? Why? Some big investor can only make the earlier date. Marcus does not want to miss the opportunity. I spent that weekend creating the most detailed documentation I had ever written. A step-by-step guide for properly transitioning from my administrator credentials to appropriately scoped service accounts with timeline estimates and risk assessments for each phase. I sent it Sunday night to Marcus, the entire development team, Kenneth and Richard. By Monday morning, I discovered my access to the Talent Fusion development channels on our company chat had been revoked. When I asked about it, the system administrator, a recent hire who reported to Marcus, told me it was to streamline communication channels. Sandra continued to be my eyes and ears. The following week, she texted me during a Talent Fusion team meeting. Marcus just told everyone to ignore your documentation, says it is over-engineered and will slow them down. The next day, they are hard-coding access credentials into the configuration files to make the demo run smoother. And finally, the text that made my stomach drop: Marcus was asking HR about transition processes today. I think he is building a case to let you go. Be careful. I began backing up important documentation, not proprietary code or client data, but my own notes, communication records, and the security advisories I had filed. If I was going to be pushed out, I wanted evidence that I had done everything by the book. I also made sure my personal devices were removed from the company systems, changed passwords on my accounts. Small preparations for what I increasingly felt was inevitable. The launch date was now just 10 days away. The tension in the office was palpable. The Talent Fusion team was working around the clock, fueled by energy drinks and takeout. I continued to maintain the core systems, documenting everything meticulously, but I had essentially been frozen out of the launch preparations. I knew a reckoning was coming. I just did not know how spectacular it would be. The calendar invitation appeared in my inbox at 11:30 on a Friday morning. Discussion of role and responsibilities, 3 p.m., Conference Room C. The attendees were myself, Marcus, and Jenna from HR. I knew immediately what it was. Companies never schedule terminations in the morning. They do it late on Friday to minimize disruption and give people the weekend to process before they might say something damaging to other employees. I spent the next 3.5 hours backing up my personal belongings and making sure all my current work was documented for whoever would inherit it. I was surprised by how calm I felt, perhaps because I had seen it coming for so long. Conference Room C was the smallest meeting room tucked away at the back of the office. When I arrived exactly at 3, Marcus and Jenna were already seated. A folder lay closed on the table in front of Jenna. "Rochelle, thank you for joining us." Marcus began as if I had a choice. We wanted to discuss the company's direction and how our team structures are evolving to meet new challenges. I remained silent, watching him deliver the clearly rehearsed speech. He spoke about organizational agility and alignment with strategic objectives for several minutes, without ever actually saying what was happening. Finally, he reached the point. "After careful consideration, we have determined that your position is being eliminated as part of our technical restructuring." "You are firing me," I said, not as a question but to strip away the corporate euphemisms. Marcus looked briefly uncomfortable, then recovered. We are transitioning our systems architecture to more current methodologies, and as such, many of our legacy systems are being phased out. Legacy systems. There it was again, the code for old and obsolete. The systems I built are the core of our security infrastructure, I said. They are not legacy. They are foundation. It is about relevance, Rochelle. Marcus said, a hint of condescension creeping into his voice. You are legacy baggage weighing us down. The industry has moved on from the approaches you represent. Legacy baggage. Not even legacy systems anymore, but baggage, something unwanted, burdensome. 8 years of my professional life reduced to a piece of luggage nobody wanted to carry. Jenna looked uncomfortable. She opened the folder and began explaining my severance package. 2 months' salary. Continuation of health benefits through the end of the month. An outplacement service to help with job searching. The standard corporate attempt to soften the blow of discarding a human being. We will need your company laptop and access card, Jenna said. I can walk with you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. The humiliation of being escorted out like a potential thief. As if after 8 years of loyal service I might suddenly decide to sabotage the company on my way out. We walked through the open office area. It was late Friday afternoon. So many people had already left for the weekend, but enough remained to witness my exit. Former colleagues glanced up, then quickly looked away when they saw Jenna from HR walking beside me. Nobody spoke to me. Whether from discomfort or fear for their own positions, the silence was deafening. At my desk, Jenna handed me a cardboard box for my belongings. Family photos. A collection of tech conference badges. A plant I had kept alive somehow for 4 years. 8 years reduced to a single box. While I packed, a member of the security team arrived to change my passwords and disable my access. Tim was his name, a recent hire I barely knew. I need to verify all your access has been revoked, he said apologetically. Can you confirm your system accounts? I listed off my standard accounts, watching as he methodically disabled each one in the admin panel. But I noticed he was only checking the basic corporate accounts. Email, VPN, project management tools. He was not checking the development infrastructure, not the code repositories, not the deployment pipelines, and most importantly, not the API authentication systems I had built. The systems where my administrator credentials were still being used by the Talent Fusion developers. I considered pointing this out. It would be the professional thing to do, the responsible thing. But as I watched Marcus hovering nearby, his expression a mixture of impatience and poorly concealed satisfaction, something hardened within me. I had spent months documenting these issues, creating transition plans, raising alarms about exactly these kinds of security gaps, all to be ignored, dismissed, and now discarded. I said nothing. Tim finished his checklist. All done. Thank you for your cooperation. I picked up my box of belongings. Jenna walked me to the elevator, making awkward small talk about the nice weather we were having. As if we were acquaintances parting after lunch, not a person escorting another person out of their career. The team wishes you all the best in your future endeavors, she said as the elevator arrived, repeating the meaningless phrase from the termination script. Which team would that be? I asked. The one that just fired me or the ones too afraid to say goodbye? The elevator doors closed on her uncomfortable expression. The drive home was a blur. Seattle traffic was heavy with Friday afternoon commuters. People looking forward to their weekends, while I clutched a box of office mementos on the passenger seat beside me. The radio played upbeat music that felt jarringly disconnected from my reality. I made it inside my apartment before the tears came. 8 years. My systems. My code. My professional identity. All dismissed as legacy baggage by someone who had never written a line of production code in his life. I did not know then that I would see Marcus again in just 3 days. At the Talent Fusion launch that would come to be known within industry circles as the authentication apocalypse. The weekend after being fired unfolded in stages of grief. Saturday was anger. I paced my apartment, rehearsing all the things I should have said to Marcus, to Richard, to everyone who had allowed the company to change from one that valued solid engineering to one that chased trends and buzzwords. I cleaned obsessively, scrubbed my kitchen until it sparkled, reorganized my bookshelf, physical tasks to keep my hands busy while my mind processed the humiliation and betrayal. Sunday was sadness. I barely got out of bed, watched mindless television shows, ignored the mounting pile of dishes in the sink, questioned my value as an engineer, as a professional. If 8 years of dedicated work could be dismissed so easily, what was the point? My phone buzzed periodically with text messages from former colleagues. Most were variations of, "Sorry to hear what happened," or "Let me know if you need anything." Well-meaning but hollow. None of them had spoken up when it mattered. Except Sandra. Her messages were different. "This is absolute BS. Marcus is making a huge mistake. Everyone in design is shocked. You built half the systems they are using. And then, most interestingly, launch prep is a disaster. They cannot get the integration points working properly." I was tempted to respond with something bitter like, "Not my problem anymore." But I just thanked her for her support. It was not her fault, and burning bridges would not help me move forward. Monday morning brought a shift in perspective. I updated my resume, made a list of contacts at other companies, researched current job openings, practical steps toward rebuilding. I had savings to last a few months, and my skills were valuable, even if Tech Dynamics had failed to recognize that. Around noon, Sandra called. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Taking it day by day," I said, starting the job hunt. "Listen," her voice dropped to a near whisper. "I'm in the bathroom so no one hears me. The launch event tomorrow is turning into a circus. Marcus is panicking. They cannot get the demo environment stable because the authentication keeps failing." A small petty part of me felt satisfaction. Are they still using my credentials in the code? As far as I know, the developers were working all weekend trying to patch things together. Marcus is telling everyone it will be fine, but I heard Kenneth telling Richard they should consider postponing. But they will not. I knew the company well enough to predict that. Marcus convinced them. The technical issues can be fixed by tomorrow. The event is too big to cancel now. Press releases have gone out. Analysts are flying in. But Rochelle. She hesitated. It is bad. Really bad. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and checked LinkedIn. There it was, a post from Marcus. "Excited for tomorrow's launch of Talent Fusion, the result of our amazing team's innovative approach to enterprise security. Proud of how we have modernized Tech Dynamics with fresh talent and cutting-edge methodologies." The post had dozens of congratulatory comments from people who had no idea what was actually happening behind the scenes. The corporate theater of success before success had actually been achieved. I closed my laptop and called my therapist. I had been seeing Dr. Rivera for general anxiety management for a couple of years, and she fit me in for an emergency session that afternoon. "I feel like I should be over it already," I told her, sitting in the familiar calm of her office. "It is just a job." "It was more than just a job to you," she said. "It was 8 years of your professional identity. It is normal to feel this loss deeply." We talked through my feelings, the anger, the hurt, the questions about my worth. And then she asked something unexpected. "Have you considered attending the launch event tomorrow?" "What? Why would I do that?" "It might provide closure. A chance to see that chapter end definitively on your terms rather than theirs." I considered it. The event was open to the public with registration available online. I would not be crashing it. And perhaps seeing the product actually launch would help me accept that my time at Tech Dynamics was truly over. Or perhaps a small voice whispered, "You want to see what happens when systems built on shortcuts and dismissal of expertise go live." That evening I registered for the event under my full name, Rochelle Sawyer. No hiding, no sneaking in. If anyone from Tech Dynamics had a problem with my attendance, they could say so directly. Then I went shopping. If I was going to witness the next chapter of Tech Dynamics' story, I wanted to look my best. I found a tailored charcoal gray pantsuit that projected confidence and professionalism, added a bold red blouse for a touch of defiance. As I laid out my outfit for the next day, I made a promise to myself, regardless of what happened at the launch, I would not intervene. This was no longer my company, no longer my problem. I would attend as an observer, nothing more. I slept poorly that night, dreams filled with failing systems and accusatory faces. Woke up before my alarm and spent extra time on my appearance, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. Armor for what would undoubtedly be an emotionally challenging day. The drive to the Westlake Grand Hotel was filled with memories. Streets I had driven countless times to reach the Tech Dynamics office. The coffee shop where I had conducted impromptu mentoring sessions with junior developers. The park where the company had once held summer picnics before it grew too large for such personal gatherings. I parked in the hotel garage, took a deep breath, and reminded myself why I was there. Closure. A chance to see the final result of years of work, even if my name would not be mentioned. A definitive end to this chapter of my career. I did not expect to witness a technological catastrophe that would become legendary in Seattle's tech community. I did not expect to lock eyes with Marcus across a room full of confused investors as he realized exactly what legacy baggage actually meant. But perhaps deep down I knew that foundations matter. That shortcuts eventually collapse. That expertise dismissed as irrelevant has a way of proving its worth in the most dramatic fashion possible. The Westlake Grand Hotel had been transformed for the Talent Fusion launch. The ballroom entrance featured a massive digital display with the Tech Dynamics logo and animated graphics showing abstract representations of security and connectivity. Staff in company-branded attire directed attendees to the registration tables where gift bags containing branded merchandise awaited. I gave my name to a young woman at registration, half expecting to be told I was not welcome. Instead, she smiled brightly, checked my name off a list, and handed me a badge. "We are so excited to have industry professionals like yourself joining us today," she said clearly, having no idea who I actually was. I took the badge and gift bag, then made my way into the main ballroom. The space was impressive with theatrical lighting and a massive stage at the front. Multiple large screens hung above the stage, currently displaying the Talent Fusion logo on a blue background. Round tables filled the floor space, each with elaborate centerpieces in the company colors. The room was already half full. Investors in expensive suits clustered together, comparing notes. Technology journalists tapped on tablets, preparing their coverage. Industry analysts studied the promotional materials that had been placed at each seat. I recognized several of Tech Dynamics' largest clients among the attendees. The CIO of Hartman Financial. The security director for Northwest Healthcare Systems. People who had trusted the company in part because of the robust security architecture I had designed. I chose a seat at a table near the back of the room, positioning myself where I could observe without being immediately noticeable. As I settled in, I spotted familiar faces from Tech Dynamics beginning to circulate among the guests. Account managers, marketing specialists, members of the executive team. Kenneth, our CTO, looked stressed, his usual calm demeanor replaced by tight smiles and frequent glances at his phone. Richard seemed to be avoiding direct conversations, sticking to brief handshakes before moving on to the next person. Neither of them looked like executives about to unveil a revolutionary product. I noticed several of my former team members among the technical staff setting up equipment at the side of the stage. They looked exhausted with the unmistakable appearance of people who had been working through the night. One of them, Alicia, spotted me and did a double take. She gave a small hesitant wave, then quickly returned to her task when one of Marcus's developers gestured urgently for her assistance. "Rochelle, is that you?" I turned to find Sandra sliding into the seat beside me. She looked elegant in a blue dress, but her expression was one of barely contained anxiety. "I cannot believe you actually came," she whispered. "Are you okay?" "I am fine," I said. "My therapist suggested it might provide closure." "Well, you might get more than closure." She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "They have been in emergency mode all night. The integration points keep failing, and nobody can figure out why. Marcus is insisting they go ahead with the full demonstration anyway." Before I could respond, the lights dimmed and an announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The Tech Dynamics presentation will begin in 5 minutes. Sandra squeezed my arm. "I should get back to my assigned table. The design team is seated together up front. Will you be okay back here?" "I will be fine," I assured her. "Go before someone notices you talking to the legacy baggage." She winced at the phrase but hurried off to join her colleagues. As the room darkened, I felt strangely calm. Whatever happened in the next hour, it was out of my hands. I was here as a witness, nothing more. The presentation began with a slick video showcasing Tech Dynamics' history and growth. I noticed they completely skipped the early years, beginning the narrative when the company already had over 100 employees. No mention of the founding team. No acknowledgement of the core systems that had made their initial success possible. When the video ended, Richard took the stage to enthusiastic applause. He spoke about the company's vision for the future, its commitment to innovation, and the revolutionary nature of the product they were about to unveil. And now, to introduce Talent Fusion, please welcome our Director of Product Strategy, Marcus Maxwell. Marcus bounded onto the stage with the confident energy of a motivational speaker. His suit was impeccably tailored, his smile dazzling under the stage lights. Today, he announced, we move beyond outdated approaches to enterprise security. Today, we leave behind the constraints of legacy systems and embrace the future. I felt a twinge of anger at the continued dismissal of the work that had built the company, but I kept my expression neutral. This was his show now. Marcus continued with a presentation full of buzzwords and grand promises. The screens above him displayed graphics showing how Talent Fusion would supposedly revolutionize how companies manage their security infrastructure. We have completely modernized our approach, he declared. Out with the old restrictive architectures, in with dynamic responsive systems built by the brightest minds in tech. The irony was that many of the features he was describing relied on the core authentication systems I had designed. They had simply wrapped them in new interfaces and given them different names. But you do not need to take my word for it, Marcus said, reaching the moment of truth. Let me show you Talent Fusion in action. A live demonstration of the future of enterprise security. This was the moment I had been both dreading and, if I was honest with myself, anticipating. The screens above the stage changed to show a dashboard interface. Marcus picked up a tablet that would control the demonstration. First, let us look at how Talent Fusion monitors and responds to potential security threats in real time. He tapped the tablet, and initially the demonstration seemed to work. The dashboard, populated with data charts, appeared, showing network traffic, and a map displayed global connection points. As you can see, the system provides complete visibility into all aspects of your security infrastructure. Marcus continued, his confidence growing. Then it happened. A small error message appeared briefly in the corner of the screen. Marcus did not seem to notice, but I saw one of the technical staff stiffen. Now, let me show you how easily Talent Fusion integrates with your existing customer management systems. Another tap on the tablet, and this time the response was not so smooth. There was a noticeable delay, then the screen flickered. When it stabilized, half the data fields were showing error codes instead of the customer information that should have appeared. Marcus laughed nervously. Looks like we have a small glitch. Let me just reset this section. He tapped frantically at the tablet while maintaining his smile. The screen refreshed, but now even more error messages appeared. I could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead. While our team addresses this minor technical issue, let me tell you about some of the other revolutionary features of Talent Fusion. He tried to continue with his prepared remarks, but it was clear something was seriously wrong. The screens behind him were now showing cascading error messages, most of them related to authentication failures. Exactly the issue I had warned about repeatedly in my documentation. The murmurs from the audience grew louder. Investors exchanged concerned glances. Journalists began typing rapidly on their devices, sensing that the story of the day was shifting from a product launch to a product failure. Marcus's smile became increasingly strained. Dave, can you help me out here? He called to one of his lead developers. Dave hurried onto the stage, tablet in hand, furiously typing commands. The large screens now showed him attempting to access the administration panels of the system, trying different approaches to bypass the errors. Just a moment, folks, Marcus said, his voice tight. Sometimes the cutting edge can be a little sharp. The weak joke fell flat in the increasingly tense room. I sat perfectly still, watching the disaster unfold exactly as I had feared it would. Then came the moment that would be described in tech blogs and industry gossip for months to come. Dave, in his desperation to fix the failing demonstration, pulled up the core configuration files on the main screen. apparently forgetting that his debugging session was being displayed to hundreds of people. As he scrolled through the code trying to locate the source of the authentication failures, he suddenly stopped. His finger hovered over a section of the configuration file where API credentials were defined. There, in plain text visible to everyone in the ballroom, were my administrator credentials, my username, my access keys, hard-coded directly into the core API configuration, exactly as I had warned against in my documentation. Dave stared at the screen, then slowly turned to look at Marcus. The blood drained from Marcus's face as he realized what everyone was seeing. And then Dave did something I will never forget. He pointed silently at my name in the code, then pointed out into the audience. At me. Marcus followed his gesture, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked with mine. In that moment of recognition, I saw a complex mix of emotions cross his face. Shock. Realization. Fear. And finally a dawning horror as he understood the full implications of what was happening. The system was failing because my credentials, which had been hard-coded into the core configuration, had been deactivated when I was fired. Every authentication request was being rejected because the system was trying to use access keys that no longer existed. The entire platform, their $10 million investment, their revolutionary product was collapsing because they had built it on top of my personal access credentials and then removed me from the company. The investors had begun to stand up. Questions were being called out from various parts of the room. Richard rushed onto the stage, attempting to take control of the situation. But it was too late. The screens went completely dark, then displayed a single message. Authentication failed, access denied. The Talent Fusion launch had just crashed spectacularly in front of the entire industry, and everyone in the room now knew exactly why. I stood up quietly and made my way toward the exit. I had seen enough. I had my closure. As I walked out, I heard Marcus calling my name, his voice desperate against the growing chaos behind me. I made it halfway across the hotel lobby, before Marcus caught up with me, breathing heavily, his perfect composure shattered. "Rochelle, wait!" He called loud enough that several people turned to look at us. I stopped and turned slowly to face him. Up close, he looked like a different person than the confident executive who had fired me 3 days earlier. His face was pale, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it, repeatedly, his expression frantic. "You need to help us," he said, his voice a mixture of demand and plea. "The entire system is down." "I am aware," I replied calmly, as I warned would happen in my documentation about credential management. His expression shifted rapidly between anger and desperation. "Did you do this? Did you sabotage the launch?" The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. I did nothing except get fired. Your team built a system dependent on personal access credentials, then removed the person those credentials belonged to. This is exactly the scenario I documented in my security advisories. You could have said something during your exit interview. I wrote extensive documentation about proper credential management that your team ignored. I sent multiple security advisories that you dismissed. I created a transition plan that you never implemented. I kept my voice level, conscious of the people in the lobby who might be listening. Your technical choices led to this outcome, not my actions. Before he could respond, Richard and Kenneth emerged from the ballroom, scanning the lobby until they spotted us. They hurried over, Richard's face tight with controlled anger, Kenneth looking more resigned than surprised. "What is happening?" Richard demanded, addressing the question to both of us. "The authentication is failing because the system is trying to use Rochelle's credentials, which were deactivated when she left." Kenneth explained before Marcus could speak. "I reviewed the logs. There is no sabotage here, just poor implementation." Marcus's face flushed. "We can fix this. We just need to reactivate her access temporarily." And then what I asked: "Continue to rely on my personal credentials indefinitely. That violates every security best practice in existence." Richard turned to me, and I saw a flicker of the thoughtful leader he had once been before investors and expansion had changed the company's priorities. "Rochelle, I understand you have no obligation to help us. But there are 8 years of your work wrapped up in this company too. Is there a solution here?" Before I could answer, the lobby doors opened, and a stream of people began exiting the ballroom, many already on their phones. undoubtedly spreading news of the failed demonstration throughout their networks. Among them were several major investors, their expressions grim. Marcus saw them too, and panic flashed across his face. We need to do something now. Every minute we are down is another investor walking away. At that moment, Sandra emerged from the ballroom carrying a thick binder. She walked directly to our group and handed the binder to Richard. This is Rochelle's complete documentation on credential management and system integration, she said, including the transition plan she developed for properly removing personal access dependencies from the talent fusion systems. Richard took the binder, surprise evident on his face. You kept this? Sandra nodded. I made copies when I saw what was happening. Everything Rochelle warned about is in there with dates showing when she submitted each document. Marcus stared at Sandra with a mixture of shock and betrayal. You went behind my back. I did my job, Sandra replied firmly. Preserving critical documentation is part of my responsibilities as a senior design lead. Richard flipped through the binder, his expression growing more serious with each page. Finally, he looked up at me. We clearly made a significant error in judgment, he said, the formal language, barely concealing what was essentially an apology. Would you be willing to come back as a consultant to help us implement these solutions properly? I considered the request carefully. Part of me wanted to walk away and let them deal with the consequences of their decisions. But another part, the engineer who had spent 8 years building systems she believed in, hesitated. If I help, I said, finally it would be on my terms. I would need full authority over the credential restructuring process and appropriate compensation for emergency consulting. Name your price, Richard said with the decisiveness of someone watching millions of dollars in investment potentially evaporate. Triple my former salary calculated as an hourly rate, public acknowledgement of my contribution to the core systems, and Marcus is removed from any oversight of security architecture. Marcus started to protest, but Richard cut him off with a sharp gesture. Done, he said. Kenneth will work with you directly. Can you start immediately? I nodded. I will need access to the system cores and a team of competent engineers. Not necessarily the newest, but the most experienced. You will have whatever you need, Richard assured me. And that was how I found myself back at Tech Dynamics at 7:30 that evening, sitting in a conference room with Kenneth and a hastily assembled team of the company's most skilled engineers, many of whom had been pushed to the company's sidelines during Marcus's reign of innovation. The issue is fundamental but fixable, I explained, sketching out a diagram on the whiteboard. We need to create properly scoped service accounts for each component of Talent Fusion, then gradually transition the authentication chains from my personal credentials to those service accounts. How long will that take? Kenneth asked. If we work through the night, we can have a stable demonstration version by morning. A properly restructured production version will take at least a week of careful implementation. One of the engineers, Jason, who had been with the company almost as long as I had studied my diagram. We warned about this exact scenario in the architectural review meetings. I know, I said. Now we get to fix it. We worked through the night fueled by catered food and a steady supply of coffee. The team was skilled and motivated, perhaps energized by the opportunity to demonstrate that experience and methodical engineering still had value. By 4 a.m., we had successfully created the necessary service accounts and migrated the most critical authentication chains away from my personal credentials. By 6 a.m., we had a stable version of Talent Fusion running in a test environment properly authenticated with appropriate security boundaries. Richard arrived at 7 looking like he had slept as little as we had. How does it look? We have a stable demonstration version ready, I told him. No bells and whistles, but the core functionality works correctly now. Good enough for a smaller demonstration to key investors this afternoon. Yes, as long as expectations are set appropriately. This is not the full platform yet, but it proves the concept is viable when properly implemented. Richard nodded, then addressed the entire team. I owe all of you an apology. I lost sight of what matters in building a technology company. I allowed flashy demonstrations and marketing promises to take precedence over solid engineering and security practices. He turned specifically to me. And Rochelle, I owe you the biggest apology. You were never legacy baggage. You were the foundation everything else depended on. Marcus was conspicuously absent from the recovery efforts. I later learned from Sandra that he had been reassigned to a subsidiary company in a non-technical role, effectively removing him from any position of authority over engineering decisions. The company held a much smaller demonstration for select investors that afternoon. Kenneth led the presentation with me, and the core engineering team available to answer technical questions. It was honest, transparent, and focused on the actual capabilities rather than marketing hype. Surprisingly, most of the investors responded positively to the transparency. As one of them put it, "I would rather invest in a company that can admit and fix its mistakes than one that hides them behind flashy demos." Talent Fusion would eventually launch 3 months later than originally planned, but with a solid architectural foundation and proper security implementation. And contrary to Marcus's beliefs about legacy systems, the launch would be successful precisely because it built upon the proven core infrastructure rather than trying to work around it. But that was still in the future as I drove home that morning after the all-night coding session. I was exhausted but felt a strange sense of peace. I had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible, but more importantly, I had helped preserve something I had spent years building. I did not know then that this crisis would lead to a fundamental restructuring of tech dynamics, or that I would play a key role in that transformation. I just knew that expertise matters, that foundations matter, and that sometimes the most valuable things in technology are not the newest but the most reliable. 6 months after the launch disaster that came to be known in tech circles as the authentication apocalypse, I found myself sitting in a new office at Tech Dynamics. The nameplate on the door read Rochelle Sawyer, Chief Security Officer, a position created specifically for me following the restructuring of the company's leadership. The view from my window looked out over Elliott Bay, the water sparkling in the spring sunshine. On my desk sat a small trophy, a joke gift from the engineering team, a miniature fire extinguisher with a plaque reading, "For putting out dumpster fires." My journey back to Tech Dynamics had not been a straight line. After the emergency consulting work to stabilize Talent Fusion, I had initially planned to move on. I had offers from several companies who had heard through industry channels about my role in salvaging the launch. But Richard had been persistent. "We need someone who understands both the technical foundations and the importance of security by design," he had argued. "And frankly, we need someone who is not afraid to say no when something is being done poorly." The restructuring had been comprehensive. Marcus had been transferred to a marketing role at a subsidiary company far removed from any technical decision-making. Several of the executives who had enabled his approach had chosen to leave. And most significantly, the company had returned to its roots as an engineering-driven organization where technical excellence took priority over marketing hype. Talent Fusion had eventually launched successfully 3 months after the disastrous initial attempt. We had rebuilt it properly, maintaining the innovative interface and features, but ensuring they were built on a solid foundation of well-designed security architecture. The press coverage had been positive, with several tech publications noting the refreshing honesty about the initial problems and the thoroughness of the solutions. My new role came with both authority and responsibility. I oversaw all security architecture across the company's products, reported directly to the board, and had veto power over any implementation that compromised security standards. But perhaps more importantly, I had become a bridge between the experienced engineers and the newer talent. Rather than seeing the younger developers as threats or competition, I had established a mentorship program where seasoned engineers shared their knowledge of foundational systems, while newer team members introduced innovative TWIPE approaches. The resulting collaboration had produced some of our strongest work yet. Sandra stopped by my office, knocking on the open door. "The quarterly security review documents are ready for your approval," she said, placing a tablet on my desk. "And the engineering team wanted to know if you are joining them for lunch." "Tell them I will be there," I replied. "I just need to finish this email to the Northwestern healthcare client." After she left, I leaned back in my chair and reflected on how much had changed. The bitterness I had felt after being fired had gradually transformed into something more constructive. I had learned valuable lessons about documenting everything, standing up for my expertise, and the importance of building proper foundations before adding flashy features. The company, too, had learned its lessons. Richard had implemented policies ensuring knowledge transfer and proper credentialing were part of every project plan. The board had established technical oversight committees that could not be overruled by marketing concerns. And perhaps most significantly, the culture had shifted back to one that valued expertise regardless of how long someone had been in the industry. My phone buzzed with a message from Jason, now heading the core infrastructure team. The new authentication framework passed all security tests. Your design recommendations made the difference. I smiled at the notification. The framework had been a collaborative project between some of our most experienced engineers and a group of creative new hires. Together, they had built something better than either group could have created alone. The irony was not lost on me that my greatest professional growth had come through one of my most painful professional experiences. Being dismissed as legacy baggage had forced me to recognize my own value independent of external validation. The humiliation of being escorted from the building had taught me the importance of maintaining dignity, even in difficult circumstances. And watching the product launch implode had reinforced my conviction that proper engineering practices matter regardless of what is trendy or expedient. I had also learned to set better boundaries. My new contract included explicit terms about decision-making authority, proper credit for my contributions, and even requirements for work-life balance. I no longer worked weekends unless there was a genuine emergency, and I had established similar policies for my teams. As I prepared to join the engineering team for lunch, I reflected on the most important lesson of all. True professional value comes not from job titles or company loyalty, but from maintaining your integrity and expertise regardless of circumstances. Being fired had not diminished my skills or knowledge. It had simply revealed the short-sightedness of those making the decision. In the tech industry, where disruption is often valued over stability and the newest approach is automatically assumed to be the best, there is profound wisdom in understanding that some principles remain constant. Security cannot be shortcutted. Foundation matters. Experience has value. And sometimes the most innovative solution is not throwing everything away to start fresh, but building thoughtfully upon what already works. I gathered my things and headed to the elevator, exchanging greetings with colleagues along the way. Not just the ones from my original team, but newer hires as well. People who had joined after the restructuring and knew me only as the CSO who balanced security requirements with pragmatic solutions. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection and noticed I was smiling. Not the forced smile of someone trying to prove their worth, but the genuine expression of someone who knows their value and is doing work they believe in. The legacy baggage had become the cornerstone, and that perhaps was the most satisfying turnaround of all. Have you ever been underestimated at work or had your experience dismissed as outdated? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. How did you handle it, and what lessons did you learn from the experience? Remember to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe to hear more tales of workplace redemption, and share with anyone who might need a reminder that experience has value. Thank you for listening to my journey from rejection to vindication, and remember that sometimes your greatest strength lies in exactly what others dismiss.